Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Good
I
morning.
was just writing to my brother who's been complaining about politics. I told him he should stick to music, sports, dogs, and his grandson, Fred, who he takes care of. And he said, but the Sox are worse than Trump.
I know. I've noticed a lot of depressed Sox fans lately.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Well, the Cubs aren't anything to, but I guess
Well,
Cubs
well,
fans are
that's a
just
source
used to
of
it.
happiness. That's a
Right.
source.
And also Cubs fans themselves are might be, although Sox fans have had also a lot of tribulations, but for some reason, Cubs fans are associated with long suffering.
They're Jewish.
They're doing terrible this year.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cubs are doing terrible.
Yes, they are. Right.
Sharon, we're not talking about the Cubs right now.
You were just doing it. You just did. Let's see. What number were we at here? So our last conversation, which is about vidui. Oh, now I remember it was in the 70s. Yeah, here it is, 73.
Rabbi Karsh,
Yeah,
I'm sorry, but I have a basic thing.
yeah.
If I'm offering a korban,
Yeah.
let's say a Torah or shlomim or something like that, is there always a confession involved? Is there always a vidui?
I do not think so. No, there's only there is a vidui if it's a sin offering or a guilt offering. There is something called a vidui if you bring the bikurim, a special vidui if you bring the first fruits. There is but as far as just, let's say, because something good happened, you're bringing a Thanksgiving offering or a peace offering. I am fairly certain that you do not, that there is not a vidui, that there's only a vidui if it's a sin offering or a guilt offering.
Okay.
Okay, so back to the various offerings. And now we're on to the offering for a zav. There are two types of zav. There is a male zav and there is a female zav. They are not the same. I don't know why they have the same name. You would think I would, because this comes up a lot in the Gemara. And so you'd think I'd know everything about the zav, but it's not the kind of topic you want to know everything about it. And therefore that might be part of my, it's not an excuse, an explanation for why I don't know everything about it. But one of the things that is curious, and I should know, I feel like I should know, is why the male zav and the female zav share this name, zav, when there's no connection between their ailments. For the man, the ailment is something like gonorrhea. We don't know the sort. We're not saying that it's a sexually transmitted disease per se. It's just the description of the Torah where there is some kind of a liquid that is coming from the penis. I'm looking for a word there, but I'm not finding it. Anyways, it's a color. It's like a yellowish discharge. That's what I was looking for, from the penis, and it apparently, in the eyes of modern day medicine, seems a lot like something like gonorrhea. So the way it works is that if he has one of these discharges, if he sees this discharge once, then he's impure just for one day. If he sees this discharge a second time, and this is within a certain period of time, if he sees it a second time, now he is impure for 7 days. If he sees it a third time, he's impure for 7 days, plus he has to bring offerings. So the offering that we're talking about here is the offering that the Zav brings if the Zav saw more than 3 or more discharges within a certain period of time. Then not only is he highly impure, but he also has to bring a korban, an offering. We saw also with somebody who had the skin disease, which is called tzara'at, that they have a period of contagion, and then they have I don't know, that's not the, we'll talk about that in a minute. So they have a period of tuma, and then even they have to resolve the tuma, but they also have offerings that they have to bring up, impure, what we'll call impurity. All right, so that's the male Zav. The female Zav, Zava, she's called, is bleeding from her uterus, but it is not menstrual bleeding. It's not coming at a time that would be menstrual bleeding. The blood doesn't look the same. The experience doesn't feel the same as apparently as menstrual bleeding. In such a case, and especially one of the prime determinants is it's not in a time that would be regular menstruation. If she sees blood once, then she's impure for 1 day. If she sees blood a second time, she's impure for 1 day. If she sees blood 3 times, and again, it's this kind of bleeding, which is not menstrual blood, then she is now a Zava, and she too has, there's special rules that she has to, which also apply to him. There has to be like 7 days where she did not see a blood discharge, or he didn't see one of his discharges. If they have 7 days where they didn't see it, that's when they are going to be declared pure. And then, they have to go to the mikvah. They also have to bring korbanos. We've talked about the term tuma before. It's a complex notion. By that, I mean there's layers of meaning, not complex that it's hard to understand, although maybe it is, but I mean complex by it has layers or several different components. So on the one hand, there are elements in Tuma that make it useful to think of contagion, that there's some kind of contagion, because something that's Tameh can often make something else Tameh. And there can be a kind of ground zero or person zero when it comes to thinking about purity and impurity. So therefore, contagion can sometimes be a useful metaphor, but the problem with it is it makes it seem like there's something wrong, and there's not always something wrong. For instance, menstruation, there's nothing wrong with menstruation. That's a completely healthy and normal process. So it doesn't help for a situation like menstruation to think about it as contagion. There's another element of it that is more like withdrawing, because that seems to be in many of the cases almost required, that the person is withdrawing to some degree from their regular everyday activities. There's certain types of tuma where the person has to withdraw from the temple area all tuma really. A person has to withdraw from the temple area. There's certain types of tuma where the person has to withdraw even from their home, like if they have sarat, if they have leprosy. So you have this kind of imposed withdrawal, some kind of imposed withdrawal that happens to some degree with tuma. And you could say in the case of menstruation, that part of it is also a kind of a nod to the physical, the feeling that kind of desire to withdraw a little bit from the everyday lifestyle that might be felt by somebody who's menstruating, that they just are not interested in being out there. So it could be it's a kind of nod to that as well, although obviously, because it's such a big subject, it's not only about menstruation, there's a big subject. So it is, it's obviously there's more to it than that, but you could say it's a kind, to a certain degree, it's a kind of forced withdrawing. There's another element of tuma, of impurity, that is characterized as a response to death. That there are, like, the real symbol for impurity is a dead body. And there are those who suggest, based on Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, that all of Tuma is about our response to death in some way or another. The dead body is the most literal, but there are other forms of, take menstruation. Menstruation is a kind of death. In other words, it's the end of a potential, the potential life. So it could be that, and you could show how every element of Tuma somehow is connected to death in some manner or form. So you could also speak of Tuma as a reaction to a confrontation with the notion of death. So those are just three layers, and there are more that are, but so when you're talking about how it plays out practically in the world, a lot of times contagion is useful. If you're talking about how an individual experiences it, withdrawal is useful. And if you want to talk about, like, some of the depth of it, perhaps mystically, a reaction to death, it is a, so if you had a word that somehow captured all of those, then that would be the best translation for the word tame. But we have impure. It's not very satisfying.
So what's the first two again, Rabbi, after and before death?
Contagion. There was contagion and withdrawing. So you have tuma as a kind of contagion. A lot of times what we're talking about in the Gemara, we're trying to figure out what happens if somebody in this step touches that, then what's the condition of that? Is it if it's truma, if it's a sacrificial meat, if it's something? So oftentimes, or let's say somebody's in the room with a dead body, and there's a window open, or there's a door open, or there's that you'll see in a lot of the conversations about purity and impurity, discussions about what happens in such a case. Also, we talk about the person to touch the dead body, and then that person touches something else, so there's different intensities of purity and impurity. So that's the contagion level. And then the withdrawing, which is the experience of somebody who is tome, some element of withdrawing from everyday life or society. And then there's that contact with death thing that goes on. All right. So once this person is said to have healed from his zovitude, then he has to offer these offerings. We've seen in the Gemara that stage between when they've gone to the mikvah and brought the offerings. Are they less tomei? Are they, what exactly is that space? That's the kind of space the Gemara loves to try to define. So in this case, the person is no longer having discharges. They've waited the 7 days. They're no longer having discharges. They're considered in some sense healed from whatever it was. Then they're supposed to go to the mikvah, and then they're supposed to bring their offerings. And usually you have a whole night in between, because usually what happens is you go to the mikvah and then you have the nightfall, and then you can't bring the korbanos till the next morning. So that's a kind of in between time, and then you get it. So we had the word healing here. The Rambam uses the word healing. He also uses the word tahara, purity, and he also uses the word kapara, which is atoning. So there's some need to atone. There's some there's some process of healing, and there's some process of resolving the impurity to get purity. So these are, and they each, the kapara one was we did not really talk about it here yet, that there's an assumption that if this has happened, there must be something that that they did wrong, that the person did wrong, just like we have with the tzarat. With the tzarat, with the skin affliction, oftentimes it's associated with lashon hara, for instance, like Miriam in last week's Torah portion. She speaks about Moshe. She's rebuked for speaking about Moshe, and then she gets tzarat. So she's like a paradigm for this notion that when you get that illness, when you get the tzarat, it's because you spoke ill. Also, Moshe, when he's originally shown signs to show to the Jewish people to help them recognize him as their leader, so he said, they're not going to believe me. And then God asks him to put his hand in his coat and take it out. And he has, that's amongst the signs, is his hand is white as snow. It's leprous. I mean, not leprous, but tzarats. And there too, it's connected to him speaking. That's typically how the Midrash does it, connects him to speaking against the Jewish people. So here, just want to see what. Let's see, I'm just going to take a sample, whatever I find here. Downloads. So this is something called Kol Torah. So he quotes the Chizkuni, who is a early commentary. I mean, he's after Rashi. He writes a commentary on Rashi. I think the next topic in the part, let's just see what the Chizkuni is as long as we're doing this. Chizkiyo ben Manoach. He was a French rabbi and Bible commentary of the 13th century. He is generally known by the title of his commentary, Chizkuni, in memory of his father who lost his right hand through his steadfastness in faith. He wrote a commentary on the Torah under the title Chizkuni. The commentary is based principally upon Rashi, but also about 20 other commentaries. Okay, so his writings were printed. He's writing in the 1200s, but the printing of it, obviously because of the printing press, I mean, they were written by hand. They're printed pretty early. It said it was printed in Venice in 1524. That's pretty early. Okay, anyways, that's the Chizkuni. So the Chizkuni says as follows. That a Zov and somebody who has tzara'at are compared to someone who steals from God. Because at first glance, it seems hard to compare the involuntary contamination of those people to someone who steals from God. But it can be reconciled with the concept of avera goreret avera. One sin leads to another. The Zav and Tzarua cause impurity, which in turn leads to worsening morals, and in turn stealing from Hashem. The slippery slope eventually leads to one of the worst situations possible in society: couples accusing each other of infidelity. The Sota process is, so that's how he's explaining the development of Parshat Naso, which is the two parshas before, that impurity. So they're actually talking about it the other way around. They're talking about this. This is by Eitan Barinholtz. He is suggesting that one of the dangers of impurity is it can lead you to a mindset where you say, what I do doesn't really matter now, because anyways, I'm considered to be in some kind of lowly state. If I'm a Metzora, I'm not even allowed to live in the cities. I'm a castaway. And as a castaway, how much does my behavior really matter anymore? So I guess that's the opposite. They're talking about the danger of being Tamei, but not about what might have caused it. I apologize that I cannot think of right now what specifically is said to lead to Zov or Zova. But the fact that it's suggesting that I need kapara implies that there is an assumption that I would not have gotten this if I hadn't done something. By the way, this was an attitude of mystics. It is not recommended today, but it was an attitude of mystics going back a few hundred years ago. Even the Vilna Gaon was said to have lived this way, where there's a famous story about Rabbi Elijah of Vilna, the Vilna Gaon, who lived in the early 1700s. The story is that he was ill and he went to the doctor. The doctor told him what was wrong and then recommended some cure, and the Vilna Gaon didn't take the cure. And so his students asked, well, if you're not going to take the cure he suggested, then why did you go to him in the first place? And he is quoted as saying that he needed to find out what was wrong. Once he found out what was wrong, he would decide upon the cure. In other words, when he was told what was wrong, let's say the doctor is telling him that the source of his illness is in his gallbladder or something. So then the Vilna Gaon would apply what he knows about the gallbladder, the mystical significance of the gallbladder, and he would fix what was wrong spiritually with that, and then heal himself. So that ultimately this is not exactly like Christian Science. Christian Science, my understanding, which is extremely superficial, is that it's about prayer, that you see God as a source of healing and you pray to God and he'll heal you. This teaching of the Vilna Gaon seems to be more in the ballpark of Rabbi Chaim Vital's teachings in Shari Kedusha, the Gates of Holiness. Rabbi Chaim Vital mentions in the Gates of Holiness, those teachings of Rabbi Chaim Vital in the Gates of Holiness, he says are the teachings of his teacher, the Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria, of blessed memory. So he suggests that every limb, every sinew that we have in our body is connected to a mitzvah, either a positive or negative commandment. And that once I know what ails me, I associate it with that mitzvah, and I now try to do that mitzvah, or I try to do that mitzvah more purely. And then by working on that, I can heal what is the physical problem, because the physical problem is just a kind of warning. It's a manifestation of the spiritual problem in a way that calls attention and allows me to fix it. That's what mystics practiced, apparently, in older times. We are cautioning against doing this, and to stay as far as possible as trying to do this. But apparently, there were people who did. So they would identify the underlying spiritual problem, and eventually they would get healed. They would heal the spiritual problem, and that would take care of the physical problem. But then again, you had to know how to make that connection to the spiritual problem. And so the verse that this comes from, V'hu Amro Yisala V'Yisbarach Shemo, so God, may he be, who is elevated, may he be blessed, may his name be blessed, said, when the Zav becomes pure from his Zavness, on the 8th day, he shall take 2 birds. His offerings are bird offerings, 2 turtle doves. So that's the male Zav. Here is the female Zav. Now, the fact that the Rambam has them listed as 2 separate things is interesting, because the Rambam likes to consolidate when he comes to his list of mitzvahs, but maybe that's a nod to the fact that they really seem so different. That is, that he commanded us that any woman who's healed from a discharge offer a sacrifice. Again, we're talking about bleeding, not during her time of menstruation, and she's had 3 bleedings. So she's considered a zava, and she has to bring an offering, and that is 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, and this is the sacrifice of the zava, and she is lacking atonement until she offers it. And perhaps the questioner will challenge me and say, since the sacrifice of the zava is like the sacrifice of the zava, why don't you just count this type of sacrifice with one? That one is obligated regardless of who is obligated, like you do with the sacrifice of the sin offering, the definite guilt offering, the uncertain guilt offering, and the variable sacrifices. As you counted each and every one is only one commandment each. You did not concern yourself with the multiplicity of transgressions for which one is liable, such that one is liable to sacrifice for each and every one of them. So it should have been appropriate for you to not concern yourself with the multiplicity of classes of people who are liable for the foul offering. The question
Rabbi?
is, yeah.
I have a foolish question. If a woman has to do an offering, for some reason I've always associated offerings with men. So do women make the offerings also themselves? I mean, do they?
Yeah.
And their husbands do it for them? Or
No,
they
no,
have
the
to?
woman herself goes. The woman herself goes. The truth is, the woman herself goes, and I'm hesitating here, but I think technically she could slaughter the animal even. Just want to see here. I no longer. Just 1 second. I am pretty sure that she could shecht her own korban, because the rule is that even a non-Kohen can shecht a korban, can slaughter the korban. It's only from the collection of blood and onward that has to be done by a korban. And so I am almost positive that the woman, in theory, could shecht her own korban. But she goes. Now, it could be, there are times, let's say the Korban Pesach, where she is supposed to be part of the Korban Pesach. It's possible that just because there were so many people standing in line to bring these korbanos, that for purposes of modesty, etc., they didn't want there to be men and women standing on line, hanging out with each other, schmoozing and stuff. Because you see them concerned about that in other regards when it comes to the Beis HaMikdash. So it's possible that in a situation like that, they might suggest that the men be the ones to bring it. Although I don't remember seeing that overtly, but it might have been the case. But otherwise, the woman brings her own offering.
Maybe they had an entrance for women and an entrance for men.
Well, they not for the Korban Pesach, though. I don't think so, because there was so many people.
Yeah,
They had to be standing in line.
there's a lot of lashon hara going on.
I doubt it. I'm sure everybody was on their best behavior.
Mhm.
All right. That questioner should know that the sacrifice of the Zav and the Zav are not for sins. Oh, here you go. The questioner should know that the sacrifice of the Zav and Zava are not for sins, but rather for a specific matter. And if the matter of discharge were the same in men and women, like the name is the same as the name of one is Zav and the other one is Zava, it would have then be appropriate to count them as one. But the matter is not like this. For the displacement of blood in a woman, if blood would be likewise be displaced in a man, he would not be liable for a sacrifice. And the word zivut relates to the matter of displacement, but the displacement is not the same in both of them. Again, he's not explaining, therefore, why don't you give it a different name? He's not explaining that. He's just noting that they're not. So in the explanation, they said the man becomes impure with white and a woman with red. And the law of Zav and Zava is not like the law of a man with Tzarat and a woman with Tzarat. And the open proof about this is they're saying in Kritut, 4 are lacking full atonement: the Zav, the Zava, the woman after childbirth, and the one with Tzarat. Behold, you see how they counted the Zav and Zava as 2, but they counted Tzarat as 1, whether it's a man or a woman. For the discharge of a man is different than that of a woman. And the verse that appears about this matter is his saying, when she becomes clean of her discharge, on the 8th day she shall take 2 turtledoves and 2 pigeons. The only thing is, he makes the point here, and I get it. He's saying that they're not bringing it for any particular sin, right? They're bringing it because of a condition, but it's still called kapara. It says atonement. So the question is, even says 4 are lacking full atonement. So you have to work on that word kapara, atonement. Okay, anyway, so that is Zav and Zava. And I'm sure I'll try to get something about that question, why it has the same name, and what is the atonement that we're talking about. The next one we're going to get to is about the korban that a woman who gives birth brings. And we'll also talk about that. Why is she, it seems like she needs kapara too. Why would she need kapara? We'll talk about that and other fascinating things. I look forward to doing that with you guys tomorrow. I'm very grateful for your time and that we get a chance to get together. Be well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Bye-bye, Rabbi.